I, Juan de Pareja by Elizebeth Borton de Treviño. Chapter 1, in which I learn my letters. I, Juan de Pareja, was born into slavery early in the 17th century. I am not certain of the year. My mother, who was called Zulema, was a very beautiful black woman, and though she never told me who my father was, I suspect that he was the keeper of one of our master's warehouses, a white Spaniard who could not afford to buy her. But I know that he did give her a golden bracelet and gold hoops for her ears. She died when I was about 5, and I was not told any more than that she had flown away to heaven. I may I have always wondered what happened. Perhaps my life might have been different if she had survived. It is likely that she had died of a fever or some other illness. Seville, where we lived, was seldom without fear of the plague, for so many ships from foreign ports sailed up the Guadalquivir to tie at our docks, and anyone who died of a mysterious malady was hastily buried in fear and trembling, and in the hope that he had not brought us the pest. I missed my mother terribly, for she had always rocked me to sleep in her arms, even when I was a large child, and she sang to me softly in her deep, rich contralto. Even now that I am an old man and have come through so much, I can close my eyes and hear her voice humming the songs I love, feel her arms around me, warm save for the pressure of her golden bracelet, and enjoy for a fleeting moment that sense of safety and of love with which she surrounded me. She was a tender creature, lavish with small caresses and kindnesses. When she sat sewing on the mistress's garments in the light of an eastern window in the early morning, she pierced the silks and velvets gently with her needle and smoothed the stuff with her slender, sensitive, dark hands. Looking up at me, she would smile, and her melting eyes would send love toward me, like a touch. Ay, my mother, I have some knowledge of painting now, hard gained over the years of my life, and what a challenge to a painter you would have been. What a delight and a torment to try to catch the soft sheen of apple green taffeta and garnet velvet of the mistress's gown, the sober brown of yours, the pink and gold of your turban, picked up by the gold hoops in your ears, and the beautiful dark glow, like that of a ripe purple grape, along your round neck and slender cheek. And how to paint your lovely hands, fluttering over the silks like two dark birds. After my mother's death, the mistress took me for her page boy and dressed me in a fine suit of brilliant blue silk and set an orange and silver turban on my head. Also, she gave me my mother's earrings, though she kept the bracelet and wore it. Mistress pierced my ear herself and drew a thread through the hole, moving it a bit each day until it healed, and then she hung one of the hoops in my ear. It cleans the blood to wear an earring, she told me. There, I shall keep the other one for you in case you lose this. Mistress was kind, but capricious, and she was often forgetful because she adored Master so much, and he was always ailing, a constant worry to her. Mistress was a de Silva, a Portuguese descent, from the city of Oporto. It was my duty to walk behind her when she went out to the shops or to take sherbet with her friends, carrying her reticule, her fan, her missal, her rosary in its little pearl-studded box. Juanico, she called me. Juanico, my fan. No, do not hand it to me. Fan me with it. I am suffocating with the heat. No, 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 not so hard. You will muss my hair. I soon learned with the fatalism of slave children not to be surprised when she slapped me with her closed fan, a sharp rap that sent sudden pain along my hand and made tears sting under my eyelids. Just as suddenly, she might turn and set my turban straight and pinch my cheek fondly. I was in the same category as her little tan and white dog, Toto, which she affectionately, alternately cuffed and cuddled. Yet I was devoted to Mistress. When I was sick, she watched over me and got up in the night to bring me broth. She saw that I had clean water to wash in, and she gave me a piece of her own soap each time she ordered the long white bars for her bath. She fed me well and saw that I had money to buy sweets in the street, and sometimes she let me go to watch the strolling players to the fair. I will always be grateful to her for one thing. She taught me letters. My mistress, I realize now, like many women of her class, had very little education. She read slowly and laboriously, and it always took her several tearful afternoons to compose a letter to her family in Portugal or to her nephew in Madrid, a young man who was a painter. Yet, Mistress had a great deal of practical wisdom, and she knew many things because she trusted her judgment and cultivated her memory. One hot afternoon in September, she called me to her bedroom, and for once she did not begin immediately to list a series of errands and duties for me to perform. She was wearing a gauzy, cool dress, for although she had drawn the curtains to keep out the sun and to preserve the colors of her Moorish carpet, the room was warm and her forehead was damp. She was fanning herself, gasping a little. "Stand over there, Juanico," she said. "I wish to study you." She took a long, steady look at me. Then she nodded her head. "Yes," she said to herself. "Yes, I believe he is intelligent enough. Quite." Then she spoke to me, mopping her neck with a large white cotton handkerchief. "I'm going to teach you the alphabet," she told me. "If you pay attention and practice well, you will learn to write a fair hand, and then you will be able to do my letters for me, and perhaps later on help master at the warehouse. I will arrange that nobody is to bother you while I'm having my afternoon siesta. In those hours, you are to practice." I was not very old at the time, 9, perhaps, and the thought of learning something that provoked as much anguish as it seemed to cause the mistress when she sat down to write a letter did not attract me. But I knew how impetuous she was, how changeable. I merely answered, "Yes, mistress." I was certain she would forget all about it. But she did not, even though a thunderstorm came up in the night and the rain poured, refreshing the city and washing away the dust. For the next day dawned cool and bright, the kind of weather when she loved to promenade and show off her fine clothes made from the rich materials her husband brought from Turkey and Persia. The morning started as usual. When she called me, she was attired in a robe of plum color and was wearing gold chains around her neck and her black lace mantilla. We swept off to Mass, I walking just a step behind her, carrying her sweetmeat box, her rosary, and a little switch with feather tufts to be used for frightening away mangy dogs and dirty street urchins who might press too close. Mass was in the great cathedral, with its soaring arches, its tall pillars, its glinting gold on altars and picture frames, its soft candlelight in the scented gloom. This was for me, as always, a delight. I loved the melodious chanting of the priests, the beauty of their vestments, the glorious moment of the elevation. Mistress often had to rap me with her fan in church, for I quite forgot her sweetmeats and her rosary, everything, while I sent my soul upward to bathe in a golden light which seemed to come down from God. After Mass, I hoped Mistress might go to the house of a friend who sometimes made that strange American drink for us, foaming chocolate, and served it in hot, tiny cups. Mistress always allowed me to finish the last sips in her cup. I loved it and tried to keep the sweet taste on my tongue for minutes afterward. But this day, Mistress took the short way home and rustled ahead of me almost in a hurry. She went straight to her room, and it was one of the serving maids, a country girl with thick wrists and ankles, who was saving up her wages to get married, who got the sharp edge of Mistress's tongue for not having made the bed and aired the room. Get about it and have everything in order in 10 minutes, ordered Mistress, for I wish to work at my desk and I cannot bear to see a tumbled bed. Mistress put away her mass veil and rosary and rolled up her sleeves above the wrists. Then she set out her inkpot and quill, and I saw that she had not forgotten her threat to teach me to make my letters. We began at once with A, and we went through B and C and D that very morning. I learned from Mistress what sound each letter represented, and it came to me with a flash of joy in learning to write. I would also learn to read. So later on, when Mistress had her nap, I applied myself to my task and practiced carefully, for Master had a library with many leather-bound books in it, and he spent hours there, enchanted, reading aloud and laughing to himself and shouting and making comments on what happened inside the book covers. I longed to learn what his books told him that gave him so much pleasure. Master was a dark, slender man with a skin that had gone yellow from so many fevers. He was always sickly. He had warehouses and counting rooms down on the wharves, and he went there early every morning. He could not abide breakfast. My liver cannot work until I have had a brisk walk, he would tell Mistress, when, in one of her imperious moods, she commanded him to have breakfast. She liked very much to eat, and periodically she insisted that he take a coddled egg, or a morsel of fish poached in wine, or some other tidbit. Usually, Master came back to the house about 3 in the afternoon to eat his frugal meal, and then Mistress would have rages of love and frustration, for he would not taste the dainty dishes she herself had prepared for him, asking only for boiled vegetables and a crisp crust of bread. But you eat like a monk, Mistress used to rail at him, though he seldom answered her, but only smiled and patted her hand to calm her. After resting, he always went into his library, where he passed such happy hours quite alone. Envying him his books, I worked hard at my writing, and for once Mistress was consistent and steady. Every day, no matter what else was planned, she checked my bit of rag or Damascus paper and gave me new letters to draw. When I began to make them better than she was annoyed at first, but after a little, her common sense came to her rescue, and she cried, "There, I knew it, Juanico. I declare you will write a good hand that no one could be ashamed of. Your letters are round and clear, and you draw the tails on them most beautifully. You like doing this, no?" I hung my head so that she could not see how much I loved it, for she was capricious, and if she thought I preferred doing the letters to anything else, she might make me do other things for a while to keep me humble. So time went by, And eventually I began to write all her letters, especially when Master was ill and she was very busy with him, bathing him, and attending him in every way she could. She would often make me sit with pen and paper while she distractedly dictated, the while changing the water on cut flowers or airing the sick room or measuring out Master's medicine. Write to my sister in Oporto, Juanico. You know the address, and tell her that we are about the same here. My darling husband eats almost nothing. Even broth will not stay on his stomach, and he has terrible pains. Dashing away her tears with the back of her hand, she would continue. Ask her to send me 2 big skins of the very best Oporto wine, and also some of the herb we used to take as tea when we had upset stomachs when we were children. She will remember the name of it. Tell her to send me the wine and the tea by the very first messenger, and I will reward him when he arrives. And send my love, and say at the end of all the things I always say at the end all the things I always say in my letters. Do this right away and bring it to me today. Sometimes I drew little designs on the borders of the letters to illustrate some point. Perhaps a bit of lace from a handkerchief or a small bird or an orange or the mistress's little dog Toto. She was amused by these and did not scold me for them. Master became more and more ill. At last he could not leave his bed, and our house was very sad. I remember now the letter Mistress had me write to her nephew in Madrid after Master's death. My dear Diego, I have to give you most sorrowful news. You know how your Uncle Basilio always loved you. Now he will never embrace you again. He was in such pain in the last months that I dare not weep, for it was God's mercy that gave him peace, and I must be grateful to him. But I am lonely and in the dark now, for my dear companion is beside me no more. He was much older than I, and he spoiled me, but I loved him very much. Ay de mi. I hope to make the journey to Madrid to visit you, as you so as you have so often invited me, but I will pass my first year's mourning here in Seville. Your uncle planted a little orange tree in a tub, a new kind, very juicy and sweet. I shall bring it to you as a gift from him when I come. Your loving aunt, Emilia. From this letter, I knew that we would be in Madrid in a year's time, and I began to think very much about Don Diego, the nephew. I learned from remarks here that there he was a painter of great talent, but taciturn, severe, and strange. I thought it would be wonderful to watch him work, and I hoped there would be such moments when I was not occupied with duties toward my mistress. I knew that Don Diego had been a pupil of Pacheco and had married that great painter's daughter. I determined somehow that I would one day worm my way under some pretext into Pacheco's studio, for he was still working in Seville and had many pupils. How I would love to visit a painter's studio, watch him lay on the colors, see the visions of his trained eye appear little by little on the clean white canvas. But Mistress kept me close at home, for she never went out now except to mass. She was fretful and became thin from fasting and from tears, and sometimes it was all I could do to bring a faint smile to her lips. Toto and I tried our best to divert her. She was busy, too, going over accounts at the warehouse, though the long columns of figures made her head ache. But I managed to get near Pacheco's house on a day in summer. It turned out to be a sad day. I shall never forget it. That day portended much trouble and suffering for me, but I did not know it when I skipped out into the fresh early morning before the sun was high to bring fresh bread from the baker's. I ran, taking the long way home, taking the long way round, hoping that as I passed the painter's house, I might catch a glimpse of him working inside his patio. For this was the hour when maids washed down the doorsteps and threw buckets of water into the streets to lay the dust, and the big zaguan was wide open. As I came near, I saw a funeral cortege was forming. Horses stood draped in black net, tossing black plumes on their heads. A coffin was carried out of Pacheco's house. I questioned some boys nearby, and I learned that the painter's youngest daughter had died in the night, and they were now taking her to church to be present at her last mass before burial. There's a pest in the city, they told me, crossing themselves, and there are funerals all over. It came in with a boatload of slaves and ivory from Africa. Listen, the death bells are tolling. I listened to the solemn dirge of many church bells. In my haste, I had not heard them, for the sound of church bells was always in our ears and had become something of which I was not conscious. Frightened, I ran away to the bakehouse, but there the doors were barred shut, and a big sign of the cross, still wet with paint, glistened in the morning sunlight and told me that someone within was dying of the plague. Then I rushed home, breathless with fear that I might find out our own door locked, and the terrifying advice drawn on it with hasty strokes. In this I was prophetic or intuitive, call it what you will. I have often had these flashes of news in advance of their happening, because the very next morning it was I who, with tears streaming, painted the cross on our zaguan, and before that day was gone, Mistress was prepared for burial. When she was taken away to the tolling of sad bells, I could not follow, for I had fallen sick most suddenly and was past all thinking. I lay on my cot, dreaming of water, burning with fever, suffering dreadful hallucinations and terrors, drenching sweats, horrible retchings, and vomiting. I had no idea how many days and nights I lay thus at the point of death. When at last I came to my senses, rose, and weakly went in search of food, I found that there were no servants, and there were dust and silence everywhere. I had been abandoned. I drank water from a half-filled wooden bucket, and in the patio there were a few oranges on the trees. I was too feeble to climb for the best ones, but I ate one that had fallen to the ground, all overripe as it was. I was ravenously hungry. Afterward, I slept again, deeply and without dreams. A tremendous pounding on our front gate woke me finally, and though I was still weak, I managed to make my way, reeling along the corridors and call out, "Quien? Who's there?" It was a friar in a worn brown robe, one of those I had often seen in the streets of Seville, going about caring for the sick and dying. He came in and washed me and made me a fresh bed and tucked me into it. And he cooked hot broth and fed it to me with a wooden spoon. I am Brother Isidro, he told me, and it is God's miracle that you are alive, boy. Every other soul that was in this house has been laid in earth. He paused to cross himself and murmur a prayer. He was an old man with a fringe of white hair, and he had lost several teeth, so that his words whistled unexpectedly. At one of those whistles, we heard a little sound, half yelp, half moan, and Brother Isidro went bustling about to see where it came from. He discovered Toto, all thin and starving, his pretty coat stiff with dirt. The poor little dog must have hidden in the house all those days. Brother Isidro clucked to him, and then he fed him broth too. Toto licked his hand and then crawled toward me. Poor little fellow, murmured the friar. I will take him with me. They will care for him at the convent. And you, boy, must pray and give thanks and ask to be shown why God has chosen to save you. There is something he wants you to do. There is some duty he has laid upon you. What duty? I whispered. He will tell you in his own good time, answered Brother Isidro. He will show you what you must do and why he has kept you in this life, just as he showed me. I was a soldier going out to the Indies when my ship foundered, and we went down with all hands, and only I was saved. I found a spar and clung to it until I was rescued. But while I was washing about in the sea, I saw in a dream that I was meant to nurse the sick, and I've been doing it ever since. Now I will come back tomorrow to look after you and bring you food, and you must lie and sleep and rest and pray. We will see what is to become of you and where you are to stay. I am a slave, I told him. I am Juan de Pareja. I belong to Doña Emilia de Silva y Rodriguez. I will make inquiries, and I will care for this little dog. Now, do not get up. You are still weak and might take a chill. He hurried about, washing up his bowls and spoons and stowing them into a big leather sack he carried. Heaving this up on his shoulder, he picked up the little dog and pattered away. I heard the great front door closing behind him. I tried to pray, but I did not say more than a few words before sleep overcame me. I learned from Brother Isidro a few days later that I had been inherited, along with all the other property, by the painter in Madrid, Don Diego Rodriguez de Silva y Velázquez. End of chapter 1.